For more on all this, I want to bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns. She is a CBSN political contributor and national political reporter for Real Clear Politics. Caitlin, thanks so much for being with us.
Of course.
What does this investigation into Esty's office say about the culture right now on Capitol Hill?
This was an explosive story, months and months of reporting, and this comes as, Congress faced its own reckoning, of course, with this Me Too movement. The details in this report are really startling, and the fact that this person was kept on for as long as was described is also very concerning to a lot of folks. This raises the question of, what comes next, and there have been calls among Republicans for the Congresswoman to resign, as well as from the Hartford Courant, also the editorial board calling for her to resign. She has said that she will not, but you already have some Republicans who say that this seat could become competitive, perhaps someone now stepping up to challenge her.
Well, speaking of her seat, what role do you think conduct overall will play in the midterms?
We'll have to see. It's a complicated issue. We saw Congress deal with it, and you have you had some legislation pass on the House side. The Senate is a different story. You've also had the women's movement, of course, emanating from the Women's March, a surge in women candidates running for office. Some really harnessing this movement so far. We'll see what kind of impact it has. We saw a little bit of it during the Alabama Senate race, but we just don't have enough data points right now to see what kind of impact this could have. But if a candidate makes this an issue against her, that could be something that moves this forward.
We will see there. Now, EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt seems to be in the hot seat right now, facing some questions about his D.C. condo that may have been provided by an energy lobbyist.
Right, exactly.
So how safe is his job right now?
Well, this is another example of a lot of, at least the optics looking very bad for him. And remember, he was already under fire for a couple of other ethics kinds of things. And so there is reporting that the White House is not happy with this. They haven't talked about it publicly. But the fact that, according to the reporting, that he was staying, paying minimal rent in an apartment owned by an energy lobbyist just reeks of everything that that candidate Donald Trump campaigned against, this kind of drain the swamp mentality. We're seeing these kinds of issues really plague many members of his cabinet and raise a lot of questions about what kind of message this sends.
Right, and we know he hasn't been popular among environmentalists and people who follow the EPA closely, so it'll be interesting to see.
Exactly, you're going to see a lot of pushback.
Absolutely. So you recently wrote an article, switching gears, for Real Clear Politics about the role that health care will play in the midterms, both for Democrats and Republicans. What were your findings?
It's really interesting because we're 8 years into Obamacare now, and remember, in that Republican wave of 2010, that law, the signing of that bill into law, really kind of set the stage for that Republican takeover of the House. Now we're seeing perhaps the opposite happen, and this could be an advantage for Democrats. Talking to Democratic strategists and candidates and campaigns, they say that health care is a major driver, even the top driver, for their voters in the midterm election. Concerns over healthcare costs, concerns over the stability, of course, of the healthcare law, and also concerns about what Republicans would do to further repeal the law if given even more seats in Congress. But on the other hand, on the Republican side, they're kind of being squeezed from all different angles. You have conservatives who are still upset at Republicans for not entirely repealing the law as they promised. Then you have some who are running in swing districts who are going to be held accountable for their votes on repealing health care. And then you also have the fact that, or the projection that premiums are going to rise because Republicans repealed the individual mandate in the tax bill.
It seems like you have a lot of unhappy people on both ends of the spectrum.
Exactly, and this is an emotional issue for people because, you look at polling and healthcare always rates as a top concern we've seen in polls this year.
Absolutely. And finally, CBS News has learned that President Trump froze $200 million in funding for Syria. Now, this comes on the heels of his comment Thursday about the U.S. pulling out of Syria entirely. What are we to make of all of this, especially since Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is no longer in office?
Right, that's the big question. And when the president was traveling in Ohio, he kind of teased this, and it really kind of spoke to the way he talked about things on the campaign. You know, we're pulling out of interventions abroad, but this raises a whole lot of questions, of course, about what the policy is moving forward, especially when you have the issue of Syria connected to all sorts of different things and different players involved, and it also raises questions, of course, about what Russia would do.
Right, and the transition on the National Security Council. It does seem to be a lot of confusion right now.
Exactly, and this is, of course, you mentioned Tillerson has left. There is the confirmation process that is set for Pompeo, the former CIA director, to take that Secretary of State position. But also, you mentioned, H.R. McMaster, former National Security Advisor, has departed, and John Bolton has come in. A lot of questions about what U.S. foreign policy looks like right now.
And Caitlin, I'm sure we will be talking to you about all of those questions very soon again. Thank you so much for that.